Hey, folks, are you aware that detergent pods are wrapped in plastic? That's how come they don't fall apart when you hold them in your hand. And that film around your pod, which is plastic, ends up in our oceans, our rivers, and our soil, and maybe even on your plates. Blueland is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean you're used to. Blueland uses no single-use plastic in any component, from bottles, tablets, and wrappers to shipping. Their tablet packaging is fully compostable. Blueland products are effective and affordable. For me, I really got two favorites. One is the dishwasher. They're tablets. You put them in. I find personally, I don't need rinse aid. They work perfectly, super easy. They come in a paper bag. Then you put them in a tin that you have. Refills are cheap. No more carrying a massive jug of dishwashing liquid from the supermarket. I don't worry about the little plastic film around it because there are none. And then I also got 3 bottles of cleaning fluids, one for the window, one for the bathroom, and one that is an all-purpose. And the smart thing about this process or system, they're color-coded. So I know my yellow is for all-purpose. I know my blue is for windows, and my red is for the bathroom. And then you get tablets. It's a great deal. You can even get more savings by buying those refills in bulk or setting up a subscription. Their subscriptions are customizable and convenient, so you never run out of your most used products. Blueland is trusted in over 1 million homes, including mine. Blueland has a special offer for listeners right now. Get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You don't want to miss this. Blueland.com/majority, 15% off. That's blueland.com/majority. Get 15% off. Now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute, on the Reformist win in Iran. Then Daniel Nichanian, Editor-in-Chief of Bolts magazine, as Les Fascistes arrêtés en France.
Oh, oui, oui.
Biden strikes back, may have quashed Democratic push for a new nominee by threatening mutual destruction.
Democracy's on the ballot.
Meanwhile, Miriam Adelson readies to unleash $70 million against Joe Biden as Republicans lie for the Lord in their platform. That's me, by the way, not the other Lord. NATO convenes on its 75th anniversary in Washington, D.C. Russia strikes a children's hospital in a 40-missile barrage against Ukraine. Prosecution rests in the Menendez trial for bribery. Blazing record heat across the U.S. kills 4 in Oregon amongst other places. Trump federal judge in Alaska resigns amid accusations of abusive sexual conduct. And the baby bonus, $1,000 per family with a new child, is on the ballot in Baltimore this coming November. Lastly, group files petitions to put recreational marijuana in Matt Leck's home state of North Dakota. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting a little bit early today. We're already behind. Let's quickly get to this. I just want to do this up. We're going to talk more, obviously, about what's going on with the Biden thing. Today, Senate, House, Democrats, both meeting in separate caucus meetings. This is going to sort of give us a much better sense of what is happening in terms of the push to get Joe Biden to step aside. Yesterday, the worm turned a bit. Here is AOC. Now, we're not playing AOC because she indicates a turning of the worm per se, but it's a good jumping off point to discuss with the dynamics that are happening.
I have spoken with him extensively. He made clear then, and he has made clear since, that he is in this race. The matter is closed. He had reiterated that this morning. He has reiterated that to the public. Joe Biden is our nominee. He is not leaving this race. He is in this race, and I support him. Now, what I think is critically important right now is that we focus on what it takes to win in November, because he is running against Donald Trump, who is a man with 34 felony convictions that has committed 34 felony crimes, and not a single Republican has asked for Donald Trump to not be the nominee. I'm here to win on this democracy. I'm here to win in November. And what's critically important is what the president, I believe, that the president needs to do, and I have communicated this, what the president and the White House should do in order to make sure that we win in November. And that is making sure that we pivot and working and increasingly commit to the issues that are critically important to working people across this country. How are we going to expand Medicare? How are we going to expand Social Security? How are we going to provide relief to people's rent and mortgages? And if we can do that and continue our work on student loans, secure a ceasefire, and bring those dollars back into investing in public policy, then that's how we win in November. That's what I'm committed to, and that's what I want to make sure that we
what is it done right now?
Okay, so the point here, and we should say, the entire squad, I think, or at least a couple.
Well, not Rashida Tlaib, who's
not Rashida Tlaib,
has her own reasons. But
Right.
Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar also said similar things, less forcefully, but similar things.
My understanding is Elizabeth Warren also yesterday came out and endorsed Biden. Him staying in the race, or at the very least gave an indication, did not call for him to step down. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And, as much as AOC, she was reiterating what she was told in that instance and stating as fact. And here is the point. And, a couple of weeks ago, I got a little bit of flack for saying something to this effect, which is we don't have an ability to impact this. And on some level, I think the squad feels like they don't have an ability to impact this. In fact, they would hurt any chances of any movement because they are lightning rods and are easy to blame. This is coming down to the leadership of the House and the Senate. It is going to come down at Democrats, of course, and they're going to decide based upon what their caucuses say in private in terms of pushing Biden out. But Biden clearly has said, F you. If you want to come for me, come for me.
Yeah,
and
he said
we will blow everything up, essentially.
Mutually assured destruction is what the headline was from Semaphore on what basically he's been able to make headway on. First of all, I think you're right about the strategy. We can disagree or agree with the strategy. I mean, I think that did some harm, but clearly there's some measure of let's not polarize this with having the leftiest members, whether it be Bernie Warren in the Senate or the squad, doing this and giving anybody any excuse to make this about some sort of partisan intra-party political fight, because the reality is that it's Adam Smith, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee right now, who is vocal, and you have Quigley and other Democrats who are very establishment. Patty Murray, Senate pro tempore, stopping short yesterday in a statement of basically calling Biden to drop out very, very closely. They're trying to make this about what's happening within the caucus as opposed to, partisan progressives versus centrists, which I think has value. It's very cynical, but the point is that we're running out of time at this point.
Well,
and
if you're going to stay silent, stay silent.
Let me just say this, and then we got to go because we got to get Trita on. We'll talk more about this more. But from her perspective, if she believes that this is such an existential election, what she needs to be able to do is be able to deliver the constituency that she is able to deliver, which is far different than the one that Quigley or these other people that are, they may be high in the establishment, but in terms of the public and the youth and minority populations, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, others are going to be crucial to help Joe Biden or whoever the nominee is. And this is, if your number one prize is to make sure that Donald Trump is not president after the election on November 5th or whatever it is, 6th, then this is the smartest move for them at this point. To essentially say, look, we're interested in delivering the vote for the hardest person it is going to be for us to deliver at this point. Be easier for them to do that, and that is the agenda. That is why people want Biden out, is because they think that he can't beat Trump. But if he refuses to leave, you've got to be able to pivot very quickly to trying to drag him across the finish line. All right, we're going to take a break in just a second. Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President here at from the Quincy Institute, is here to talk about a reformist win in Iran. First off, we'll hear from our sponsor today, Liquid IV. This is an easy one for me, folks. Why? Because I can literally just reach over to the side, and that's the bottle. That's actually the second bottle I'm on to already today. Every day I do this show, I drink a bottle or two sometimes of Liquid IV.
Especially in this heat, this humidity.
It's driving me crazy. I mean, that's the thing is I'm now over the weekend, I'm making sure I have a bottle or two. It's extraordinary hydration for physical endurance, mental clarity, overall well-being, and basically just survival when it's 95 degrees out. Single stick of Liquid IV delivers better hydration than water alone, 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients. For me now, I love it. They got sugar-free variety. I'm drinking the green grape. I like the lemon lime. I put it in my kids' thermos or whatever those drinking things are. I don't know what we used to call them a thermos. I don't know what they are now. Water bottles for camp. And I know the guy doesn't drink that much water, but he likes the flavor of this. So he drinks it all and it keeps him hydrated. It's super easy. They're in the sticks. You tear, you pour, you live more. 1 stick, 16 ounces of water, hydrates better than water alone. Easy to take on flights, easy to take in your backpack. Liquid IV contains 8 vitamins and nutrients. It's non-GMO, free from gluten, dairy, and soy. No artificial colors or sweeteners. Comes in 4 delicious sugar-free flavors. White peach, that was the one I couldn't remember. Green grape, raspberry melon, and lemon lime. It's a zero sugar hydration solution with no artificial sweeteners and is clinically tested to hydrate more than water alone. Turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you go, you shop Better Hydration today using the promo code MajorityRep. Not report, MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. I got to get me more of that lemon lime sugar-free. It's delicious. Folks, quick break. When we come back, Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute. We are back. Oh, Sam Seder.
I got you, Sam.
Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome back to the program Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute. Trita, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me again.
So the Iranian presidential elections happen, and a reformist wins. Masood, you're going to have to answer. Yes, thank you. How much of a surprise was this?
Well, first of all, the whole thing is a massive surprise because this was a snap election as a result of the previous president, Raisi, dying in that helicopter crash back in May. And, they have snap elections. They allowed one reformist to run. Perhaps they were calculating that reformist would not garner much support as the previous one didn't back in 2021. Hemati did not manage to generate any enthusiasm. The population overwhelmingly boycotted that election. They allowed this one to run. He did manage to garner some enthusiasm, although in the first round of the elections, participation was even lower than what it was in 2021. It hit 39-point-something%, which is the lowest that's ever happened. And it reflects how tremendously unhappy the population is in general with the situation in Iran and given up on the idea of change through the ballot box. But then he did manage to become one of the two top candidates, which meant that he goes on to the second round. And the person on the other side of the ballot is then Saeed Jalili, who is this ultra hardline conservative, which meant that people realized that they had already managed to send shockwaves to the regime by participating in extremely low levels, only 39% in the first round. But in the second round, it meant that if you don't participate, there's a likelihood that Saeed Jalili wins and you go back to essentially the Ahmadinejad years. And that seems to at least have been one of the factors, perhaps the most important factor that caused people to cast their ballots, still not at very high levels at all. It was only about 50%, which is low for Iranian standards, standard for American standards. But back in 2017, the participation rate was 73%. So this is a significant drop. And they elected him. He clearly got the majority of the votes. But everyone is very surprised because everyone had counted out the reformists. And there was this strongly held belief that the regime would never, ever again allow a reformist to be able to become president in the country.
How does, when we say the regime, maybe for us, outline for us the sort of the structure of the Iranian government so we understand, because it's almost like, I think there are some people who are surprised that that this could happen, that there would be another reformist in this instance, and don't fully have a sense of like where this, it's almost as if the Iranian people just elected a sort of a middle manager, or like I don't know what the next step up is in the corporate structure, but not the boss, not the CEO, but like maybe somebody who has a portfolio.
I would say it goes beyond that. And it kind of comes to the question of how much power does the president of Iran actually have in that system? And I think that is a very legitimate question. But I think we should also recognize that question has been somewhat politicized in Washington, because it's a question that is very much on everyone's mind whenever there's a reformist who is the president. And then, we hear all the time that, the president doesn't matter, doesn't have any real influence. When Ahmadinejad was president, all the focus was on Ahmadinejad, and no one was saying, "Oh, the president of Iran does not matter." So it's from certain quarters in Washington, it's a self-serving tool that is being used to kind of dismiss that there is someone there who actually, as part of his campaign platform, argued for improving relations with the West, getting sanctions lifted, engaging in direct dialogue with the United States. If you don't want that, if you're sitting in Washington and you prefer confrontation, then you're going to be hammering very hard on the note that, well, the president doesn't actually matter. But it is a legitimate question. I'll give you my best shot at explaining what it is. I think to a very large extent, I think it's important to recognize that in Iran, the institutions matter less than the personalities that are in those institutions. In the case of Raisi, for instance, I don't think he was a particularly important president because he didn't have the personality or the desire to make a mark of his own. He really wanted to just be the manager and the implementer of policies set by others. In the case of Ahmadinejad, it was quite the contrary. This was someone who was actually very much a hardliner, but also challenging a lot of the structures of the Iranian system from within, to the point in which he had a huge falling out with the supreme leader. Pezeshkian does not come across as someone who is going to try to really rock the boat. In fact, part of the reason why some people were not particularly excited about his candidacy is because he actually campaigned as someone who is loyal to the system rather than someone who wants to challenge the system. He did not run as an anti-establishment figure, which is really interesting. Almost all of the other reformists have run explicitly as being anti-establishment, which is part of the reason why they got a lot of votes, because people in Iran tend to vote anti-establishment. But he has not done that. Whether that is because that really reflects who he is, or whether that is a strategic calculation from his end in which he believed or calculated that if he actually did position himself as an anti-establishment person, perhaps the supreme leader and the IRGC would go to excessive lengths, including cheating, in order to make sure that he couldn't become president. Now, we won't know until he actually takes office and we get to see how exactly is he going to try to govern.
And
can you
let me just one more question. So when we describe him as a reformist, you can reform the structure of the government, or you can reform the set of policies that live within the structure of that government. What is his portfolio of policies? Because I've read some stuff from you where the Iranian Revolutionary Guard might have more control over what happens regionally in terms of do we provide funds or weapons to Hezbollah or to this group, the Kurds in northern Iraq, or something like that. But in terms of like, what is his portfolio? And I imagine that can be expanded and contracted based upon who the person serving there is. But what are the reformist policies that he is looking to implement? And you mentioned direct bilateral negotiations. What else? So
formally, foreign policy does fall under the purview of the president. The foreign minister is a cabinet member. Now, it is understood that informally, the foreign minister's position, as well as the defense minister's position, he will not put forward a name that is not approved by the supreme leader. But these are the informal rules. But formally, he is in charge of that. Informally, or in reality, Iran's regional policy, particularly when it comes to relationship with Hezbollah and the axis of resistance, is really in the hands of the IRGC. And at times, at significant loggerheads with the president. This was very visible during the Rouhani government. That does not mean, however, we should not overinterpret that. It does not mean necessarily that the reformists are against Hezbollah or believe that Iran should pursue a foreign policy in which it doesn't have a strong relationship with Hezbollah, doesn't support some of these Iraqi militias, etc. I think by and large, there isn't that much of a variation within the Iranian system. But the priority of it versus other strategies, a diplomatic strategy of opening with the West, etc., that's where it shifts. With someone like Pezeshkian as president, it means that there will be a different voice at the table. That table is not one that he completely controls, even though he's the president. His voice may not be the most important one at that table, but that voice will be at the table, whereas that wasn't the case just a couple of months ago, in which the reformists essentially were completely shut out from the system and the conversation.
Sam actually asked the question that I was thinking of, what those reforms entail, but I'm wondering if you could even elaborate further on that, because low turnout, as you mentioned, was a big part of the equation. How much democratic legitimacy does, and I can't pronounce the last name, if you could say it again, Pezeshkian have, and even though, I mean, the fact that he beat this hardliner and he has more kind of liberal mindset about, say, women in the country of Iran versus how the hardliner was presenting himself in the campaign, that seems like a good thing, but the fact that it was record low turnout also should be an indicator, if you could just square that for our audience.
Absolutely. And what is fascinating here is that when you have really low turnout, usually that has meant that it has favored the conservatives, because their own base tended to have a much, much more disciplined voting record. They always voted. This time around, the turnout was really low, lower than it has ever been. Well, not compared to 4 years ago, at least in the second round. But the Reformists actually won. And part of the reason for that is that there is a huge difference and conflict within the conservative camp. And many of the supporters of Ghalibaf, who was the conservative speaker of the parliament, appear to have shifted to Pezeshkian's side, including some of Ghalibaf's senior advisors who publicly threw their weight behind Pezeshkian rather than Jalili. So as the hardliners essentially were somewhat successful in purging the system and kicking out all the reformists and having everything control of by themselves, the very inevitable thing then immediately happened. The hardliners started fighting with each other and devolved into new factions. On the question of legitimacy, I think this is a very important question. It goes back to, what exactly is he trying to reform? Is he trying to reform the system in order to make sure that the system is no longer Islamic Republic, or reform some of its policies? Here, I think there's a difference between some of the reformers, and there's a difference between the actual politicians and the people who are voting for them. I think a very large number of people who voted for reformists, at least in the past, did so because they believed that the reforms that they were going to implement, whether they intended for it or not, eventually would lead to the collapse of the system and a different government, but under controlled circumstances. It would not lead to an uncontrolled revolution in which you would no longer be able to know what comes after the collapse. This would essentially be a reform of the system until it is unrecognizable. I think a lot of people who voted for reform were thinking that, even though the reformers may not have used that language, because if they did, they would immediately be branded as anti-revolutionaries and purged from the system. This time around, I'm not so sure that that was necessarily the thinking. To a large extent, I think a lot of folks went out and voted because the alternative was so much worse. And because they believe that their situation is so bad, economic situation is so bad, they just needed a little bit of a respite. They needed something that makes the economic situation slightly better, rather than thinking that this is a first step towards a longer process that gets rid of the regime as a whole. Many of those who were in that camp probably are the ones that didn't vote at all. They also want change, but they want much more far-reaching change and much more sooner and quicker, and no longer have a faith that it can come through the electoral system.
Do we have a sense of what the sense of the Iranian people is in regards to why the economy is so bad? Is it as straightforward as we don't have any type of decent relations with the West and we're still being sanctioned, or is it are there other factors?
So this is a question that in the US government has been important, because they wanted to make sure that the blame for the negative situation in the country primarily falls on the regime itself. I think for folks inside the country, it's actually much easier. It's not a lot about that. It's the fact that they know this is a corrupt government. Corruption is widespread. This is an incompetent government. Mismanagement is massive. But it is also because of sanctions. Now, some people may put sanctions as being 50%, others may put it at 70%, but all of these three factors are undeniably part of the reason why the economic situation in Iran is very bad. Now, During the last couple of years under the Raisi government, the strategy was not even to try to get sanctions lifted. They no longer had faith that the United States is capable of prolonged sanctions relief. That is not it's not difficult to understand why they concluded that, because at the end of the day, the Iranians signed on to the JCPOA, they lived up to the JCPOA, and it was the United States under Trump that only 2 years after the deal had been struck, withdrew from the agreement. So essentially, they have a very cynical view of US political system, and they believe that as a result, Iran can never count on sanctions being lifted by the US for long periods of time. So they shifted their strategy to what they called sanctions neutralization. Instead of seeking to have trade with the West, they were going to really dig down on trading with their regional neighbors and trade as much as possible in currencies that are not the dollar. And by that, neutralize sanctions. To a certain extent, that has been successful, but it's failed on one very crucial point. Absent sanctions relief, they're still not getting investments from China and others who are perhaps willing to invest in Iran, but can't do so because of the US sanctions. And without investment, they're not going to be able to have a good economic situation. They may be able to grow a little bit, but over a long period of time, it's going to be devastating for the economy. So Pezeshkian's argument was that they need to talk directly with the US, they need to get sanctions lifted, because otherwise Iran will never live up to its full potential, absent the investments that can come into the country once the US and Iran have kind of resolved enough of their issues to have a certain degree of sanctions lifted.
I know you just have time for one more quick question. We've spoken in the past about Biden's policy in regards to Israel and what's happened in Gaza and happening in Gaza. We have also spoken with you in the past about that JPCOA or the nuke deal. Thank you. Has your opinion as to why Biden failed to close that deal early on in his administration, as everyone assumed he would, to get back on track, has your interpretation, your understanding of why he failed to do that changed in light of how aggressive he's been and willing to support Israel's actions in Gaza? In other words, is it possible that that was never really his intention, or that that dynamics with Israel inhibited him from making that nuke deal?
I don't think it's the dynamic that prevented it. It's the fact that and I think Gaza has really enforced this. Biden really did not want to have any confrontation with any Israeli prime minister. This was critical. Their conclusion of the JCPOA was that while it was a good deal, it was too costly because of what Netanyahu did to hurt Obama in the elections. And as a result, if they were going to do the JCPOA, they had to go the extra 500,000 gazillion miles to make sure that the Israelis would be happy with it. That was the sense that I got at least a year into the Biden administration. And I think what we've seen over Gaza just reinforces that is really a crucial central organizing principle for this president. And I think it is really, really bad for the United States, because it would have been much, much better if he had just gone in for a variety of reasons, including, I would add, that I'm very convinced that the Iranians would not be supporting Russia in Ukraine in the manner that they're doing today had there been a JCPOA in effect, because the Iranians would have something to lose. Now they have nothing to lose, because all of these sanctions have just completely cut Iran off from the West. And I think there's another thing that happened here that further reinforces this. I don't know if you saw the press conference yesterday when Kirby was asked as to whether the Biden administration thinks that perhaps there's an opening now with Pezeshkian coming into office saying that he wants to have direct talks with the US. And he flat out rejected it. And on top of that, he said that part of the reason we're not going to have that diplomacy is because what the Iranians are doing with Hezbollah and support for militias in the region, regional policies, Ukraine, etc. So essentially, he used the US's many conflicts with Iran as a justification for not pursuing diplomacy. Remember the last president that used that logic?
That's the right wing. Yeah, that was the right wing talking points. That was McCain and Graham.
Biden is back to doing that.
Yep.
Now,
I mean, they're pursuing the same
this is not his
policy.
policy. Sorry?
Abraham Accords, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this is not ultimately their policy, but they're using the language and the logic of the neoconservative policy, which just further closes the political space they have to pursue diplomacy if that actually is their real policy.
Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President at the Quincy Institute, thanks so much. Really appreciate your giving us insight into all of this. Thanks
so
again.
much,
Trita.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And
doesn't it feel good that like the prospects of peace on multiple fronts for the United States, including broad denuclearization towards a hostile power, is being held up by a genocidal maniac who will be referred to as one of the worst human beings ever in history, because we've got to appeal to Netanyahu's sensibilities, apparently, under a Democratic president? Isn't that a wonderful thing?
It's funny how much that distorts the entire world.
A little. Just a little. That's depressing.
It's horribly depressing, and it's exactly the same right-wing. These were the right-wing arguments against the nuke deal in the first place, and it was really one of the most materially important, I think, things that Barack Obama did as president.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
Certainly, it was certainly within the context of foreign policy, but even beyond expansion of Medicaid and some of the benefits that came with the ACA, you've basically gone through the highlights of the Obama administration in mentioning those two things. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Daniel Nichanian of Bolts magazine will explain to us the French elections.
Better news on that front.
Tomorrow, we will also be talking to Owen Jones about the British elections. So once we start getting into parliamentary elections, forget it. We outsource. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Daniel Nichanian, editor-in-chief of Bolts magazine. And Daniel, I go to you in the run-up to any elections that we have in this country because you have always delivered, it's not even remotely close, the most comprehensive catalog of referendums that are important, local races that are important, local prosecutors that are important, sheriffs, and statewide elections. And then, of course, also French elections, which makes total sense. I think maybe there's a little bit of background that you have in French elections that make you inclined to report in the same way that you do on these smaller races across the country.
That's right. I was born in France actually, and then moved to the U.S. When I was a child. But I actually, to your question, I started to be very into following French elections and local elections even before I knew anything about American elections. When I was probably 12 or 13. So this all comes from that.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, so just broadly speaking, explain to us the French system of elections. And this was also a snap election of sorts. Macron just very recently called for these elections. So give us a broad sense of how these elections work, and then why Macron called for these snap elections.
Yes. So as of about a month ago, no one knew there would be elections this summer. The next elections were only planned in 2027, so 3 years from now. And from all the French reporting that's been done, it doesn't look like anyone really expected it outside of the very, very close circle around the president. Even his prime minister, his cabinet seemed to have been in the dark about the president's plan to call for these snap elections. And so on June 9th, I believe, just a month ago, the President Macron called for elections for Parliament, for the National Assembly, on June 30th for the first round, and July 7th, which was just a couple of days ago, for the runoff. So, very quickly, France has sort of a complex system that is partly a presidential system and partly a parliamentary system. But what matters very simply here is that the parliament is really the heart of the system. If the parliament is of a different party, a different coalition than the president, the parliament governs. The parliament effectively, the government, the prime minister emerges out of the parliamentary majority. And there isn't really a split system of government like there is in the US. The president has no veto, for instance. If the parliament, the prime minister gets to govern, gets to propose laws and so on. So it was really high stakes election. These elections were really going to decide who governs France for the next 3 years. And it looked, as probably everyone listening knows, that the far right party of Marine Le Pen was in very good shape to win elections. And the only reason they lost really is very remarkable amounts of tactical voting, of strategic positioning by everyone other than the far right to figure out a way to block them from getting into power.
Okay,
Daniel, can you
one more quick one. What wasn't Macron's election, snap election, a function of what happened with the EU Parliament election? And if not, educate me as to why. And B, sort of a subset of that, what made Marine Le Pen's Rally National, or the National Rally Party, so well situated to win, like based upon what?
Yeah, these are complex questions, and I did avoid answering the first time you asked why did Macron dissolve the assembly, because there is no particularly clear answer. That's why I emphasized that everyone was in the dark. It was a big surprise. The quick answer, again, the best I can do, and part of it has to be speculation, is the last time the country held these elections in 2022, it was surprisingly weak showing by the president's coalition, by the president's party, and they did not win a majority of the votes. They've actually managed to govern in part through a tacit alliance with the Conservative Party in France that isn't part of the government, but sort of allowing it to function with a minority of seats. But it's been an uncomfortable situation. So obviously for Macron, it could have made sense to want more seats for the final years of his term. Now, very quickly, I think what might half speculation, half what's been reported is that Macron thought that in calling extremely quick elections, again, the filing deadline was 6 days after the call of elections, and the elections were 3 weeks after, that the left of Macron, the left bloc, would not be able to ally, would not be able to form a coalition, because there's 4 parties, if not more, if you count small parties, that are always fighting, sometimes very, very strongly. It's not a natural coalition in the left. And they had just spent the entire campaign of the European elections, the left, the center left, the left, were all infighting. And Macron effectively said, you only have a few days to figure this out. We're calling elections immediately. And the gamble probably was that the left would fail to unite. And I will try to make this simple, but the French election rules are that if a coalition fails to unite, if they have 3 or 4 candidates in every district, they would be knocked out. And Macron's possible math was, if the left fails to unite, they're knocked out. The Macron bloc would get all the left seats, or a lot of the left seats. Now, what happened is entirely different. It was so quick that the left rushed. They only really had a few days to unite, and within a few days, they just put aside all of their disagreements and just said, we're going to unite, we're going to figure this out. I actually was in France just when Macron dissolved the assembly for that week, and I brought with me Le Monde from the day the left united, and it says the left is uniting to counter the far right. The urgency of the far right being at the doors of power made it that the left just for 2 days stopped arguing and we're like, we're gonna coalesce, let's just figure out how. And that's what led through a complicated series of electoral math to what happened in the elections, which is that the left held very well and the Macron bloc didn't get where he wanted.
Well, I mean, that's the question here is well, this is raging in the United States. We're talking about, like, can the left and center kind of come together behind, I don't know, some strategy forward for the presidential race to stave off the far right. I know it's not exactly the same, but what was fascinating in reading about the French elections is that like over 200 candidates, if I'm not mistaken, withdrew so that they would not split the vote among the far right. So it seems like the population came behind an anti-fascist voting strategy, but also so did many of the members themselves. If you could just explain what happened there with those over 200 people who decided to withdraw.
Yes, absolutely. So, what's important to contextualize a little is that this far right party, Le Pen's party, that was founded by her father a long time ago, has been a presence in French life and has not ever won an election, a national election, but has been a presence for a long time. And since now 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, there's been a lot of elections, a front built from the left to the right, including conservatives, against the far right. And there's never been a formal alliance between even conservatives and the far right, like we've seen in other countries. And that front has held very well traditionally up until 7-8 years ago when conservatives started to signal they're no longer really interested. And then the Macron bloc a couple of years ago and up until a week ago signaled that they were no longer really interested in these, like, a Republican front from the left to the right against the far right. And that's what it looked like would happen again. There was a very aggressive campaign in the last month. It didn't look like this idea of a Republican front could emerge again, given all that was happening. Instead, actually, so the French election system is a little complicated in that the runoffs can have more than 2 candidates, and that was going to be great for the far right because it meant that in a lot of districts, most districts actually, there was going to be a 3-way runoff, if not a 4-way runoff, which meant that the far right candidate would only need 35, 38, 40% of the vote to win the district because the runoff is effectively a first past the post. And if the left and centrist candidates had stayed in the races, the far right would actually probably have won or have come very close to a majority of seats. Instead, what happened on the night of the first round and the couple of days after, the left immediately said they're going to withdraw. Any candidate who came in third in the first round is going to drop out of a runoff to block the far right. They're going to call for people to vote for the candidates that are not on the left, whether they're on the center or on the right, whether they're conservative, to block the far right. And that's what they did immediately. There was a lot more, at first, confusion among what the Macron bloc would do. The prime minister actually really stepped up and made it a little more clear that they expected candidates who came in third to drop out. There's some reporting that the president Macron was not entirely on board and was trying to undermine that a little from within, but that really didn't happen. The prime minister pushed hard. A lot of candidates dropped out. You're right, 211 candidates dropped out of the runoffs, almost all with this idea of blocking the far right. And then the far right on Sunday, 2 days ago, just couldn't get to the majority of votes cast in the districts. They could have won with 40% of the vote, but they just couldn't get to the majority. They couldn't get to 50% threshold.
That's fascinating. So if I understand you, there were basically 2 sort of separate eras over the course of the past 6 weeks of strategy. The second one being that both the left and the center agreed more or less to say, if we came in third in the first round, we will drop out so that it's a 2-way race because we know that there is a limit on the support that the far right can get, and it's not they can maybe win a plurality in a race of 3, but not a majority in a race of 2. But prior to that, Macron was hoping that the left couldn't organize to even get on the ballot in the first round. Is that what it was?
Well, the hope. So there are 4 parties, if not more, on the left. If they each had a candidate in the first round, they each would have gotten, on average, 5, 6, 7% of the vote. That's actually what happened in the 2017 parliamentary elections. Right after Macron's first win, the left just had 3, 4 candidates everywhere. They ended up getting around 40 seats out of 600 because they were just eliminated everywhere because they couldn't get in the top spots.
Because they would split their vote, and so
they split their votes so massively that they couldn't get in the runoff. Whereas this alliance was in part to get into the runoffs. But then again, what's interesting is they did all that to get in the runoff, and then they dropped out. 125, 130, I believe, left candidates just quit the runoffs, even after all that work, because the priority for them, and as I was showing, that's why I showed the newspaper, the whole idea of why they were doing this, why they were saying they were doing this, is to block the far right. So that was really important.
So, okay, where are we left now? So we have Macron's Renaissance Party. We have, but they have been rolled into a Popular Front. There is it Popular Front type of situation, or what? Like who will control now the parliament, and who will come out of that parliament as prime minister at this point?
Great question that no one knows the answer to. So the parliament right now is divided into blocks that all really do not like each other and have never worked together, because France has no culture of coalition building. This is not a country that has, like other countries you may know of, a culture of figuring out these like grand unity coalitions like Germany or Italy or whatnot. This just doesn't happen. This hasn't happened since the beginning of this form of institutional regime 70 years ago. So no one has any experience of this. They're all still busy fighting each other. So there's 3 major blocks to know of. There's the left bloc, which has the most seats now. As a surprise, they have about 190 seats. There's the Macron bloc, which has about 160, which is a lot less than they did last time. And then there's the far right, which has 140 seats. So they're third. And then there's the Conservative Party, which used to be, the first party of France, or really dominate elections, but has now been reduced to about 60 seats. Everyone is about 100 seats away from a majority. What happens now is really confusing. The left says because they have the most seats, they should be allowed to govern. They should be given the prime ministership. No one else seems to really be on board with that. The center, or the Macron bloc, is sort of split between between allying with conservatives, which has been where the heart of the coalition has been really in since the beginning, and some people who are more interested in allying with the left. The only bloc that's out of the game is the far right, because no one wants to ally with the far right, and they're third anyway.
So what happens now? I mean, like, okay, so I get that everybody's unclear. There's no sort of tradition of creating this, a coalition. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But in the meantime,
Right.
Who's steering the ship? When is there a deadline?
Someone has to govern. So someone has to be in the prime ministership at some point. So that's
what is that point? Is there a deadline? Like the only thing that I can think this is even like, somewhat analogous to is sort of in the year 2000 when we were doing recounts and we didn't know who the president was, but there was a deadline, at least, to get this done before inauguration, or, and it
Right.
happened, not to my liking, or what I think is a fair way, but be that as it may, is there a similar dynamic here? Like,
No, those are great questions. I mean, France is a lot more similar to the UK, for instance, where things happen very quickly. So right now the prime minister hasn't changed. It's still the person who was governing when the Renaissance bloc, the Macron bloc, had the governing power. And I was just seeing a constitutional scholar say that that's already stretching the bounds of what is to be expected in France, that the assembly has changed. There's been elections. The new MPs actually are already today going to the new National Assembly. And some constitutional scholars saying it's already stretching the bounds that the prime minister hasn't changed. But there is no particular deadline other than the fact that the current government just doesn't, in practice, have the ability to do anything other than the most routine tasks of governing. The fall is really the deadline because the new budget has to be passed. So the deadline for something having to really be passed is the fall. There's the Olympic Games, obviously, in just a few weeks in Paris. So a lot of people are talking about that and the confusion of having sort of no real clear government. And what might happen is really going to, I think a lot of things could happen. There could be somehow a left-wing government that emerges if the Macron bloc chooses to allow it, because technically the Macron bloc would have to not vote against them in the assembly. There could be a fracture within the left coalition, with the center-left agreeing to go form some kind of alliance, at least for a short term, with other parties. There could be a new alliance between the Macron bloc and the conservatives. It could even be a coalition from the center left to conservative. Everyone is very resistant right now to even considering all of these ideas. But the bottom line is, by default, someone has to govern. Someone has to be the prime minister.
Well, I got to say, I'm of two minds. One, I appreciate that our system is much more straightforward, as effed up as it is in many respects.
Is the Electoral College more straightforward than this? Is it though, Sam? Is it?
I mean, it sort of is. I don't think it's more appropriate, but it's at least like we can know, like, okay, this person messed up and that person didn't. I mean, it sort of seems like on some level right now, the French are sort of in new territory in terms of, like, it's sort of amazing, you know, it's been 70 years under the system, but it's sort of amazing that it's not been, that this bridge has never been crossed, it feels like.
Well, the reason, I mean, the idea that for much of the past 60, 70 years, the French political life was divided into like a left, the left and the right. And each of the blocs had a major party, and that party got the lion's share of the votes. So the fact that there's already three blocs is new. The fact that the President Macron created a whole new bloc, a whole new coalition, and really kind of started to replace what used to be the conservatives, the right, which because they've also shrunk, but also taking obviously a lot of votes from center left. That's created a 3 to 4 division that's really only emerged in the past 6 or 7 years, and the institutional structure of France is not designed for a situation like that, because it's not that's not how it was imagined when it was created. Yeah.
Well, so we have no deadline, so we just wait, I guess, and see how this turns out in many respects.
I mean, I think the other thing we haven't the other date, the other deadline to keep in mind is, would there be new elections? So the French Constitution banned, like, there cannot be new elections for an entire year. The president is not allowed to call new elections for another year after the first time he's done it. So no matter what, there has to be some kind of arrangement here that emerges until the summer of 2025. We could expect this to happen again in a year. And I think, you know, depending on what happens in the next year, things, you know, it could be easier for there to be an anti-far right front at the time, but it could also be harder. You know, it's easy to imagine the left being so incensed that the center the center prevented it from governing, or something else happening that makes it even harder for this Republican front against the far right to emerge, or on the contrary, maybe it makes it easier if the far right is even higher in a year. So this is not the end of the road by any stretch.
Oh, geez.
Daniel, quick question. How much did the pension reforms, if you could just elaborate on this, by Macron play into a rejection of the centrist bloc, where how he was attempting to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, something that Republicans in this country are consistently talking about as it relates to Social Security, for example?
That was a huge issue in the past few years in France. So I think in two ways. One, on the substance of it, there were obviously a lot of protests against it. The left bloc was very opposed to that reform and promised to roll it back. One major obstacle to an alliance right now between the left and the presidential bloc is that one of the left's core proposals is to roll back the chief thing that the presidential bloc has done over the past few years. So how do you form an alliance around that? But also, not just on the substance, but also on how it was done. A lot of people perceived that the way in which the prior government that just fell pushed the reform was very authoritarian. They didn't fully put the reform to a vote in parliament, and that also played a big role. The far right's messaging actually around it is actually what might be most interesting, because they spend years saying they were against the reform, that it was an example of the presidential bloc abandoning the working class and so on. And yet during the campaign over the last month, they rolled back all of their promises. It was very unclear what they were going to do about the retirement age. When they got to the doors of power and they thought they might have to do something about it, they actually rolled back their platform, and that did play a role in the confusion around the far right's campaign. So all of that is interesting. At the moment, it does not look like there's a possible majority to change that reform, but it's definitely a major issue right now.
Daniel Nichanian, editor-in-chief of Bolt's magazine. Folks, Bolt's great resource for, all sorts of things, great stories about what's happening on the ground locally, particularly when it comes to criminal justice reform and immigration, but many, many stories. Check it out. We'll put a link to it, of course, at majority.fm. Daniel, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the program. I figure I got to address this because we have gotten so many IMs about it. And I've gotten so many tags on Twitter about it. It's really the only thing that people care about. Yesterday, Jay Johnson, Jay Johnston, who played Jimmy Pesto on Bob's Burgers, but he was in Mr. Show.
Lots of funny sketches. A funny Sarah Silverman cop sketch.
Yeah.
He was in Sarah Silverman Show.
The Sarah Silverman program. Not Jay Johnson, former Homeland Security. Giving people Johnston, but it would be funny if Jay Johnson, the Obama administration official, was at January 6th.
Jay's a comedian. I've known Jay for 30 years, I guess. I mean, not well. I rarely was on a record with him. And when that did happen, he would have been in LA and I would have been in New York. But I knew Jay back, during the Mr. Show days when he was on Mr. Show writing. And I knew him even prior to that, and doing a little comedy out there. He would do sketches with Paul Tompkins at that time. I think Paul's been out of touch with him for a while. I'm not sure. Look, everybody knows that when you get rid of what was his I can't even now I just lost it, the name of his place, Jimmy Pesto's. When you get rid of Jimmy Pesto's, it should have been replaced with Hugo's hot dogs. Everyone knows this.
That's what everyone's thinking about.
Everyone knows this. Outside of that, I don't have a lot to add to this. All I can tell you is that he fell in with the Proud Boys. I think I have a pretty good sense of how that happened.
Is there a Gavin McGinnis angle maybe to that? Or?
I'm quite sure that, back years ago, Gavin McGinnis was comedy adjacent. His funny bit would be to pee his pants at parties.
That's hilarious.
And
Great.
well,
Pee
at
his
one
pants.
point, maybe probably the first time, it could have been sort of funny. But I think, this is what happens. If you try the same joke over and over again, people don't laugh. Then you've got to become a fascist. That's the playbook. I mean, and I think I think that is basically what happened. He just sort of fell in with the wrong folks, and I think he probably had some other issues that may have been going on. I'm not sure. Everything I hear is sort of rumor or secondhand, or he will be sentenced October 7th. Now, my understanding is that once his face started showing up on Twitter, I think he basically got a lawyer and, turned himself into the FBI.
Well,
I remember that day when the FBI released those images and everybody immediately says, wait a second, is this?
That was when you could tell what was real on Twitter and what wasn't. And the FBI put out images saying, can you identify this person? And people did identify him. It's sad though. I mean, I'm sorry, Sam. That's a friend of yours. That's not.
I mean, I haven't talked to him in years and years. So I mean, it's
But
it's
either
sad.
way,
Symptomatic
Listen, I
of a
feel
larger
bad
sadness.
I feel bad for a lot of these folks because there's a certain amount of disturbance that I think is there. I don't think you're necessarily of sound mind in these situations. I think what also happened is he came in and I think he cooperated. I think he gave his text messages and whatnot, and who knows what other sort of things he had to say in that situation. But I wanted to say that I had no part in it. I am reaping no benefit from it.
Unless the Bob's Burgers folks want to rewrite some episodes.
Let's put it this way: it was a missed opportunity, and I also don't want to pretend like you needed to get rid of Jimmy Pesto to have a Hugo's hot dogs.
It's not zero sum, as you're always saying.
but it could have been one of those butterfly effect situations where if they had just listened to your suggestion, all of this could have been avoided.
I'm not sure how that works out, but I'll go with it because maybe
Have you
people should
seen
just
the Ashton Kutcher movie? Everything affects the other thing.
I did not.
Makes you think.
Yeah.
Maybe had they listened to me, I would have seen the Ashton Kutcher movie.
That's called
Folks,
the butterfly effect.
It's your support that makes this show possible. You just learned about the Iranian elections and the French elections today. Maybe there's another place you could have heard about both those things today. But I doubt that show is 5 days a week. If you enjoy this program, support it. Join themajorityreport.com. It is our members that make it possible for us to survive and thrive. Join themajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee and hot chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And as always, if you AM Quickie, amquickie.com, it's free 3 days a week. Email blast gives you the top stories of the day to look out for from a lefty perspective. Also, we got a merch store, shop.majorityreportradio.com. Check that out. And as always, if you're watching us on Twitch, give us your, and you're a Prime member, give us your subscription for the month. It ain't going to cost you anything, but we'll get a benefit from it. Like us on YouTube, Give us a good review on iTunes. Tell your folks about the show. Send around some clips. It all helps. Emma, ESVN.
Yesterday, we talked a bit about what's happening, I guess, with the U.S. men's national team for soccer, previewing the Olympic teams for basketball, the WNBA a little bit, and then we gave tiers in the offseason ahead of the NHL, NBA, and NFL seasons for teams, then what to expect from them, youtube.com/ESPN show.
People love tier list content.
Oh, yes. It's the Bill Simmons-ification of sports media.
Yeah. Left Reckoning tonight, Philip of BungaCast joins us to break down the UK elections and how Labour became the party of bosses, and Seamus Malek-Afzali rejoins us to talk about Iran.
Oh, also...
the year.
Oh, we're getting some audio from you.
Out of an expected job.
You're going to say, Emma?
Oh, I will be on a program today, this afternoon, 3 p.m. You can watch my Twitter feed. I don't know if I want to say...
I saw it already.
Oh, you
it's
did?
Disgusting.
I mean, let's just confront it. Like, we can do this in public. Go ahead, Emma. You can just say it.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's between this and our different assessments of Biden's candidacy, I think it's quite clear that I'm trying to distance myself from Sam Seder and his toxic DNC apologia.
Bit of a heel turn coming, folks.
Yeah, so if you want to talk about the corrupt Democrats along with me and why... I don't know.
Because you're not having real conversations.
You want to have real conversations, you can head over to office hours at 3 p.m. where I'll be beaming in.
Are you going to
from
start
New York.
advocating for jailing homeless people?
Soon. That is the trajectory, right? But
This is why you guys don't get invited places.
I figured I need to get to the vaccine injury place first. And
which, to be clear, I don't think Tim Heidecker has any of those politics. I think he's kind of opposed to that. But you know what?
But I'm just planning
somewhere.
markers along my timeline. First, I'm going to talk about how, the Democrats are actually like an elitist cabal. And
this is like Candace Owens leaving the Daily Wire.
We'll do zoom-ins on Biden's health issues to dissect them, even though I have no doctor's experience whatsoever. And then eventually I'll be hawking gold and silver on my own podcast.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know if you really can get lower than going on the Tim Heidecker show or whatever they call it, Office Break Room Live. Is that what they call it? Oh, wait, no, that was the name of the show that they borrowed from when they said Office Hours Live. Is that what they call it?
I think so.
We were the first show to ever reference a office setting. Break Room is obviously in an office and using the word live. That was Mark Maron and I on the internet. Prior to that, never happened. And apparently then certain comedians out there whose names will go nameless except for Tim Heidecker's felt it like they could just take that name. Okay. That's fine.
First they take your name, and then they take your co-hosts. I don't make the rules.
And then your audience.
I'm not gonna sue or anything. I just think that people should know the truth, and maybe Tim Heidecker will come clean with that, but maybe he won't. Yeah. I mean, it's just I don't know.
Emma, say hi to Vic Berger for me.
Hi, Vic Berger. Oh, not now. Later. Right. I thought he was watching. I will.
No, I doubt that.
Well, Heidecker probably is taking our material. All right, folks. 646-257-3920 is the number. We'll turn on the phones in just a few minutes. 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920. We'll be right back after this in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I have it in my throat.
Alpha males are back, 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 back.
Snowflakes has what?
The alpha males are back, 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 back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.